Welcome to this session on Comics of the New Europe, which is a collection of articles about comics from East Germany, Czech Republic, Slovakia, Poland, former Yugoslavia, Hungary, Romania, and Ukraine. It is much easier, I think, to say New Europe. As I said, we have both editors and one of the participants here. We're going to start with Hose Alaniz. I can't say how much of a pleasure it gives me to introduce Hose Alaniz in this particular format, because I feel like the Jose and I go way back. We go way back virtually, far longer than we go back in person, because I remember seeing his byline on the English language press somewhere in Russia, I believe in the 90s. Jose is one of my favorite scholars.
That's way back.
Way back, yes. One of my favorite scholars, because sometimes I have to remind myself that Jose really does exist, because he seems like a figment of an Amazon algorithm that is designed to throw together every single scholarly thing I might want to read about under one person's name. He is a professor in the Department of Slavic Languages and Literatures and Department of Comparative Literature at the University of Washington, Seattle. His first book is called Komiks, Comic Art in Russia. His second, Death, Disability, and the Superhero, The Silver Age and Beyond, both from University of Preston, Mississippi. He also is a comics practitioner. He recently came out with a collection of his own comics called The Phantom Zone and Other Stories, which I highly recommend. I got an author's copy that I was very happy to have and read. He chaired the executive committee of the International Comics Art Forum from 2011 to 2017, and his research interests include cinema studies, death and dying, disability studies, critical animal studies, and comic studies. So Jose, please, without further ado, take it away.
Thank you, Elliot, everybody. Gosh, I feel like I should just have you with me everywhere to introduce me, like into every room that I enter, because I think that was fabulous. Thank you, and of course, I've been a longtime admirer of your own work, and I'm very happy to see you also doing more actual comic scholarship with your recent work on Marvel comics, and I hope that continues very, very much so. Let me share my screen with you guys. Hopefully I can do that without an issue. So you should be seeing the cover of the book now. Is that right?
Not yet.
I always ask for confirmation first.
There it is.
You got it?
Yes.
Okay. So this is the cover of the book. And as we mentioned in our introduction, the book has the kind of origin that I think is not that uncommon, in that it really started with a drink that Martha and I were having at an MLA, I believe 2016 or 2017, and we were just kind of batting around different project ideas, and then and please correct me, Martha, this is different from your recollection, but I remember it was kind of both of us stumbling on this and saying, hey, you know, I wanted to do something looking at comics of the Eastern European or the former Soviet bloc, or whatever you want to call it, the region. And says, hey, I wanted to do that too. And since both Martha and I have been writing on Czech comics for a number of years, we discovered that we have this motivation and this interest to do a project like this in common. And so that's really how it went. So I really think that we produced this volume together with all the collaborators, contributors in record time. I mean, it really just all went very, very quickly and very smoothly. So I'm very happy that it all came together. And there's no way that certainly that I could have done this on my own, even though it was something that I had thought of maybe trying to do for a long time. So I'm happy that Martha and I had that synchrony there. So it's called Comics of the New Europe, Reflections and Intersections. The cover is by Martha, and maybe Martha will want to talk about that cover since she produced that work. And so, as Elliot said, we were interested in looking at a number of these countries that you see depicted on the map: Ukraine, Romania, East Germany, Poland, Czech Republic, and Slovakia. So it was part of course, and we get into this a lot in the introduction. I won't bore you with that, but we get into questions in the introduction on seeking to justify our choices, justify why this region, why it's important, the paucity of English language scholarship on this region to this day, and to invite the reader and other scholars to follow us and to expand and to supersede some of what we have been doing here. So we're very happy with the results. Given that, of course, there were some hard choices that had to be made, and some gaps that are obviously still in evidence. Most especially, I would say the fact that we don't have any articles devoted to the Baltic countries. I think there's a whole lot of scholarship that still needs to be done about that area. But overall, I was very happy with the results, and I thought we produced a pretty good volume. The other thing that I thought was important is that in the introduction, we managed to highlight a couple of the artists that are working today in the region that I think are of particular note, particularly for their transnational approach to their comics practice. Figures like Lucia Lomova of the Czech Republic, who writes in both English and Czech, and who works actually all over the continent, doing residencies and other things like that, but also maintains a blog and a kind of online diary. And all of these things really are taking a very transnational, I think, kind of approach to what it is to make comics in the 21st century. Speaking from a place, right, of her Czech nationality and culture, but also I think speaking to the world and contributing to it in I think fascinating and charming ways. Same thing for Anna Kirston from Poland, who is obviously from a younger generation. She was born in 1988, but she is someone who again is a wonderful comics diarist who traces her journeys through the continent and the various kinds of cross-cultural encounters that she experiences. So these are the kind of artists, I think, certainly for the part of the book that deals with artists of the present day that are, I think, characteristic of this of these kinds of comics that are being produced in the region today, particularly the ones that are engaging with both within and without the region, itself. So those were some of the things I wanted to highlight from our introduction. And if Martha, my co-editor, feels like she wants to highlight other things, I certainly welcome that. But let me go on to my own chapter from the book. In my own work, my own contribution, I look at the work of Ігор Баранько, what I call Ігор Баранько and national precarity in Ukrainian comics. I'm not going to go through the entire kind of argument. I'll go fairly quickly. And of course, we have other people who are speaking. But let me at least say a couple of words about what led me to this project and why I took this particular approach. There's been very little English language scholarship on Ukrainian comics, or really scholarship in any language. I guess there's more now since the time I started this article, but there's still really not that much. And the Ukrainian scene is still very, very young in all sorts of ways. So I wanted to highlight in particular something that goes back to my reading of Oksana Zabushko's novel, Fieldwork in Ukrainian Sex, where she says, Ukrainian choice is a choice between non-existence and an existence that kills you. This fundamental sense of a precarity that she and other Ukrainian cultural figures articulate that has to do with Ukrainian national identity in general, a country that is always feeling itself under threat of invasion or of other kinds of interventions from other powers, and so that even being highlighted in the national anthem of Ukraine. Ukraine's glory has not yet died, nor her freedom, right? So we're still here. We're not gone yet. So there's this kind of sense of a contingency and anxiety that seems built into a lot of this material. I don't need to explain to most people who follow the Jordan Center or belong to the Jordan Center, right, the various revolutions and various calamities that have befallen Ukraine in recent years, from the Orange Revolution, and again to the 2014 Euromaidan revolution, and the strife going on, of course, to this day between Russia and Ukraine, especially Eastern Ukraine, and the various ways in which Russia has been basically interfering in the internal affairs of Ukraine. And again, its approach to it as a near abroad former principality, if you will. So all of that, I think, is informing a lot of what the comics are doing in a lot of Ukrainian material these days. Sergei Plokhy, of course, is obviously a leading scholar in this area who talks about this, particularly about Russian aggression and the ways that historically Ukrainians have certainly felt that that knocking on their door, so to speak, from the East and from Russia, and the ways that they've had to kind of negotiate it over the years. The other parts of the book or of the article that I deal with rely on the scholarship on magical realism, given that both of the graphic novels by Barranco that I analyze are dealing with alternate realities and various forms of magical realism. I'm particularly attracted to Frederick Jameson's well-known articulation of magical realism as history with holes or perforated history. So, and then I go further into in the article on the question of historicity itself, and comics relying on scholars like Hilary Shute. And again, there's been a lot that's been written by these folks and others on the particular ways that comics, through their juxtapositional, imagistic, and multimodal grammar, are able to deal with questions of history in sometimes quite explicit and startling and unique ways. And that's, I think, an important characteristic of Barranco's work as well. I go through a few of other examples of work like Daogopak from Maxim Krasalov, Alexei Chebikin, and Alia Kolov. That is a series of Ukrainian graphic novels that are utilizing Ukrainian history, particularly the image of the Cossacks as a national symbol, in ways that is also, I think, evident in other countries' comics practices from this region, and that relying it to connecting it to previous examples, for example, from Repin's painting and other things like that. But again, I don't want to get into everything here. I talk a little bit about alternative histories and relying on the work of Kathleen Singles. The ways in particular, as she says at the bottom of this quote, the point of divergence in these alternate histories is often relying upon the principle of contingency, but the continuing variance from the normalized narrative of the real past, that is the rest of the narrative after that big historical difference, relies on the principle of necessity. That's certainly very true, actually, in Barranco's work, that there will be one major change, whether it is, or actually in not only in Barranco's, but a lot of the other work, from the region, from Ukraine. For example, The Will by Vyacheslav Bukayev, which is a steampunk alternate reality of the Ukrainian People's Republic from 1917 to 1921. So that part is different, right? It's got zombies, it's got steampunk, it's got all of this other kind of bizarre technology and situations, but the fundamental conflict, right, and the fundamental politics of the Ukrainian People's Republic remains largely the same. It's still a very blazingly nationalist work in that regard. However they want to dress it up. And that's also true for a lot of the work of Igor Barranco, who to my mind is really giving voice to that sense of national precarity over and over and over in so many of his works. He's the best known and most published and most translated Ukrainian comics artist, and he's been around actually for a number of years working for such major international concerns as Humanoids Press and Metal Hurlant, Slave Labor Graphics, all of these folks. And again, he often will use elements of Ukrainian history and culture in his graphic novels. He's very prolific and does some incredible work. So I knew when I wanted to write about Ukrainian comics, I knew that probably Barranco was going to be my go-to choice because he's such a major and dominant figure, and yet there was really no major article on him that I could find in English. So so I look at two of his works, Shamanism, which is a fascinating alternate history of the North America in which the European conquest never happens. And so it's a meticulously researched and beautiful graphic novel that's looking at the many different nations, First Nations of the continent, but all of it is oriented towards this notion of trying to keep the history that they're living in from staying that way, because the history of the conquest is always trying to come back, right? And so he goes through a number of episodes where he's trying to change the history to maintain his preferred timeline. And so we go over and over this episode of him trying to steal a princess from another tribe, and so that has a determining effect on the timeline. And so it's a fascinating work because, of course, every time you have a different result, so there's a kind of loop effect that is involved here with the ghost dance. All of that, I am trying to argue, is also just talking about the very precarity of not only of the nation, but of history. A much more, I think, explicit evocation of this notion of national precarity in Ukrainian culture is jihad. From originally 2003, 2004, it is later redone and revised in 2013. And this is the work that is dealing head on with the question of Ukraine and Ukraine's place in history, and how Ukraine is always on the verge of disappearing, of being swallowed up, of being consumed by other powers, whether they are supernatural or whether they are, of course, the various conquerors from the East. In the 7th century, the Scythians; in the 3rd century AD, the Huns, right? And then later on, the Mongols in the 13th century. So it's pages like this, right, where I think you could really see what scholars like Hilary Shute and others have said about the way that comics can represent history. In this case, a kind of cyclical sense of history, how there's always invaders coming, there's always new people that are there to threaten your borders, to overwhelm your borders. And basically here we cover, millennia within the course of 3 panels. So that's the kind of thing that Barranco, I think, is most interested in. Other things that are, I think, important are the ways that he is really pressing on this question of Ukrainian-Russian relations, and how a number of the characters who are Russians are there to try to undermine the government. They're there to seize power. And in this case, as you see, and this is from the translation, where a Russian character is listening to Ukrainian radio, and his first comment is, "I hate Ukrainian. It sounds like a parody of Russian. Why do we still have to put up with their independence, et cetera, et cetera." And this is dialogue that would not be out of place coming out of the mouths of some people in Russia even today. Some people that I know personally, in fact. And so, yeah, this whole idea that Ukrainian is some kind of pseudo version of Russian, or that Ukraine itself is properly and historically speaking, right, it should be this Novorossiya kind of way of thinking about Ukraine. And then so you have, again, these sorts of questions that come up over and over. The most nationalist Russian character who is there as an agent trying to seize power in Ukraine is Ilya Serbin, kind of a funny name. And as he says at one point, "Pathetic little nation, can you even comprehend what empire means?" This is also a significant scene towards the end of the graphic novel, because it is happening within Kiev's Motherland Monument, which looks like this. So, right, I think it makes a lot of sense that Barranco sets the culminating action within this relic of the Soviet era. It is a monument to World War II, of course, but that was dedicated in 1981. But it's still there as part of the Kievan landscape, cityscape. So you see it rendered here. And so this, it also becomes a kind of nexus of different alternate realities that will determine the course of history going forward. So there's a lot of stuff there dealing with, again, the living past this sense of national disgrace represented by the monument, the infiltration of the monument, and the enduring sense of a kind of neo-colonialist or anti-colonialist, I should say, struggle against powers like Russia, which suffuses jihad by Igor Barranco. So anyway, that is basically what I was going to say, and I'm happy to take any other questions. But as I said, jihad in the work of Igor Barranco, I think better than any other that I've read in coming from Ukraine, is really involved with this question, really obsessively, about Ukrainian choice being a choice between non-existence and an existence that kills you. Thank you very much.
Okay, yeah. Of all the things that are going to be discussed today, jihad is one of the comics that is easiest to find, and I think is quite rewarding. So everybody should go out and take a look, and go find it.